With the new 16 to 28 STM on the market, is the 15 to 35 worth twice the price? Let's find out. One thing that becomes immediately clear when you're using the 15 to 35 over the 16 to 28 is just how much bigger and heavier this lens is. If you're holding it out at arm's length like this, you feel it immediately in your arms and shoulders. It's quite a bit heavier, almost double the weight. One thing I was curious to see is how much of a difference there is between 15 and 16 millimeters. Like that 1 millimeter difference, does that make a big difference? Fortunately, there's a spot just up here where we can test that out. So this is a great spot to show off the difference between 15 and 16 millimeters and maybe 28 to 35 as well. Because this waterfall, we don't have a lot of space to back up, but it does give a really nice view. Let's see if we can find a good spot to take a couple photos. Okay, there's a better spot for us to test the 35 millimeter part out. Plus it's also kind of cold back in here with that water. So let's go. So one thing I'm always curious about is the stabilization, because both of these lenses include stabilization, which is crazy. I want to see if one is better than the other. How are these looking? And now we're on the 16 to 28, walking the same path, same thing, just handheld with just mechanical stabilization on both lenses. How's it look? Now, I also tested this out on the beach a bit. So right now we're on the 16 to 28 at 16 millimeters. And my big thing that I was curious about was how good the stability is built into this lens. No digital stabilization, handheld, out at arm's length, walking on pretty rocky terrain. How's it look? Let's put the 15 to 35 on and see how that looks. Now we're on the 15 to 35, same thing, just the mechanical stabilization, handheld, out at arm's length at 15 millimeters. So how's that looking? To me, the 16 to 28 stabilization actually looks a little better. I just feel like it does a little better. And this is all just the mechanical modes where you're not dealing with any of the extra added benefits of digital stabilization. Now, the wide end is one thing because there's really only 1 millimeter of difference. What happens when we go to the long end and we're shooting at 28 versus 35? Let's just run back up here also before the tide comes in and traps us out here, and we'll showcase the difference or test the difference between 28 millimeters and 35 millimeters. Yeah, this is a good spot to test the long end of both of the lenses. There. Here. So this is 15 millimeters here on the 15 to 35. Now we'll zoom into 16 millimeters, which is right there. This is 16 millimeters. So you got the 15 millimeters on the right, 16 millimeters on the left. And now let's do the long ends. So we have 28 millimeters on the right. It's the 35 millimeters, and then you have the 28 millimeters on the left. So that gives you an idea of the differences in the zoom range. Like, it's pretty substantial, especially on the long ends. If you're just doing the wider stuff, the difference isn't so big. But there is an area where these two lenses separate themselves a lot, and that's where the 15-35L does deserve the L badge, the red ring, and the twice the price tag. And it's because the 16-28, being a very inexpensive lens, very small and lightweight lens, depends heavily on in-camera corrections to correct for distortions and all of the weirdnesses that comes with having a smaller, cheaper lens like this, where the optics in the 15-35 are considerably better and just demand less in-camera correction. So let's see if I can show you what I mean here. So that's with all the corrections off. You can see there's quite a bit of distortion difference. There's just a lot going on there, especially on the wide end. But let's put the 15-35 on and see how much better or worse that is. So that photo is with all the corrections off. And then we have focus breathing. Now, most of these new cameras all have focus breathing compensation built in, which is super nice and useful, especially in video modes. But I turned it off, and I'm curious to see how much focus breathing is in this. So I'm gonna hold this shell up here fairly close. So there's the shell. There's a lot of focus breathing on this lens. That's pretty substantial. But I'm also going from very close to very far. Let's try the 15-35 out. So here it is on the shell. So there's definitely still some focus breathing, but I don't feel like it's nearly as bad. It feels much more better controlled than on the 16-28. Now here's a lens with focus breathing on. You can see it basically just totally eliminates it pretty much completely. So you can see once you turn focus breathing on, like, it's just a non-issue. And that's where the 15-35 is kind of the king. Like, it just does look better. It has a better, leads less corrections. It just has better optics. It is better. One thing I've noticed too is that the 15-35 is a little bit darker at the same settings than the 16-28. They're both an f2.8 lens all the way through, which is great for low light shooting, but it's interesting. I've noticed it's just a tiny bit darker. Not a lot, but just a tiny bit. Hey, if you're enjoying or getting value out of this video, then consider subscribing. I go out and test and compare equipment in the most real-world situations I can find here in Alaska where I live, and I give you tips and tutorials on how to use it. And beyond all the differences we've talked about so far, there are some physical differences too, aside from the size and the weight, which is substantial. The 16-28 is about half the size and half the weight of the 15-35. So if you do a lot of stuff like I do, where you're out hiking, backpacking, stuff like that, this thing is a lot nicer to have with you because it's so much lighter weight. But the other thing is that you don't get as many controls, but you do on both of them get a very nice zoom ring. On the L series lens, you get a focus ring that's dedicated, and then at the very front, you get the control ring that Canon's been implementing in their RF lenses. And then you have a stabilizer on-off switch, an autofocus manual focus switch, and then a stabilizer on-off switch. But when it comes to the 16-28, they took a slightly different approach. They didn't add a focus ring, so you get a zoom ring, which does really nice. And the weird thing about this is that you have to get it out to 16 millimeters before you can start shooting with it. So you have to pop it out like that, and then from there it retracts. But then out there you have a control ring, again, which depending on where you put the control switch will do different things. So if you have it in autofocus, it just really doesn't do much of anything. I haven't really programmed it to either. But when you put it in control mode, that's where the control ring becomes whatever you have the control ring set up to be in your camera body. So I have mine to be aperture. And then if you put it in manual focus, it can be a manual focus ring if you want to. And then of course it has a stabilizer on-off switch, just like the other ones. I want to test flaring, and not just flares and like how light refracts through the lens, but also how it handles sunstars. And we got a great location right here to test both. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the 16-28. It actually has really nice sun stars. You can see through the canopy of the trees right here. Like, it looks really good. Now there is a little bit of ghosting flare through there, but overall it looks good, and I didn't see a lot of veiling flare. The 15-35 also has decent sun stars, but not nearly as much. And it does have a fair amount more ghosting, which is interesting considering it's, I mean, I guess it doesn't make us any, it's not a surprise considering it's a more complex optical design, but I was surprised how much more ghosting it had. And I have had issues with this on night shoots around other bright light sources, like you can see here. It was really difficult to get rid of all of the ghost reflections here. But overall, pretty good results. I think I actually prefer the sun stars from the 16-28. They're just really crisp, really clearly defined, have a really nice look to them. And that's where we're gonna try out some low light stuff. But to do that, we gotta wait a bit because the sun has to go down, and I've got a 2.5 hour drive to go home. So for now, we're just gonna pack everything up and go. So when it comes to low light, both of these lenses are fixed f2.8, and they both do a really good job all the way through the zoom range. That being said, I feel like the 15-35 has a bit more ghosting flares, and the 16-28 seems just a little bit less ghosting, and that probably is mostly to do with the much better optics in the 15-35 and the more complicated optical design. But like I said, because both of these lenses are fixed 2.8 aperture all the way through their zoom ranges, both of them will do well in low light conditions. Haven't had the chance to test them both for astrophotography. I did do the 15-35, and that does phenomenally well. Images look beautiful, but yeah, it's been cloudy for days on end. I'll have to try it again some other time perhaps. But what about autofocus? Because I've been kind of surprised at some of the results so far. So I want to see if the autofocus is any better on the L series lens, or if it's just as fast and just as good on the STM lens. So I've set the autofocus speed to as fast as possible and the tracking sensitivity to as responsive as possible. So that should make it grab me as a subject faster and then the background faster. Let's see how it does. I've been shocked by the performance of the 16-28 compared to the 15-35. It has really good contrast, great coloring, and in some cases, in certain situations, depending on the f-stop you're shooting at, it has better detail and it's a little bit sharper, which is insane considering it's half the price or a little less than half the price and considerably smaller. Now that does come with the trade-offs. Like I showed you, it relies heavily on in-camera corrections, but the stabilization performance is excellent. The autofocus performance is excellent. Yes, in a couple of cases, I think it's a little slower than the 15-35, but overall it performs exceptionally well, which is amazing. So for me, in my case, and what I use these kinds of lenses for, I sold my 15-35 and I'm sticking with the 16-28 purely because it's so much smaller and so much lighter. It's just much easier for me to take when I travel, which I do a fair amount, whether it's to places in the US to work or whether I'm hiking through the mountains in Alaska. Next, you're going to want to watch this video right here. I'll see you over there. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below or join my live stream, which happens most Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, where we can have a little bit more of a conversation. I can answer questions that maybe I didn't get to in this video. I got a couple miles to hike back. I'll see you again soon in the next one. Cheers.